Well, hello everybody, and welcome back once again to our journey down the road to somewhere. And if you're joining us for the first time, it's good to have you. Everything that's gone before is still available on video on YouTube, and real easy to get to if you go to bobbeltz.com, and there's a tab for videos, and when you click on that, it takes you over to the Tell Us Project channel, and there are playlists, and you can go to the playlist for the road to somewhere and get caught up with us. We're actually in what we're calling season 3, which is the third leg of our journey, and we're in our second episode of journey of season number 3. We're actually here we go. We're again going through my book, The Road to Somewhere. If you don't have it and want to join along actually reading, I've had a number of people tell me how much they've been enjoying both reading the book and as we go through it. But it's available on Amazon. Just put my name in the search engine, and you can look down and you can see The Road to Somewhere there. I'm calling this episode, by the way, God's Greatest Hits, because the book that we're going to look at on this stop along Route 66 is the book of Psalms, and a little bit later I'll explain to you why I'm calling it God's Greatest Hits. So we are in Kansas. This is the third leg of our journey and the third season of our journey all the way through the road to somewhere. So we've been through Illinois and we've been through Missouri, and now we are on this little 13.2 mile stretch of the state of Kansas that Route 66 runs through before it drops down into Oklahoma. So there we are. In the book, John and Joy have just left Galena, and so I'll show you where that is. This is just that little 13-mile stretch there. So they've just left Galena, and they're actually on their way over here let me go back for 1 second. I was going to tell you something about Galena. So they've left Galena. They're actually on their way to the town of Riverton. In the book, one of the things that happens at this point in time is that as they're on the road outside of Galena, John looks over and he notices that Joy has kind of a disturbed look on her face, and so he asks her, is there something wrong? And her response is that she asks him. She says she was thinking about the fact about John losing his wife to Alzheimer's, which was something that we discovered quite early in the book, but just a pretty simple statement, nothing much about the details of that. And he asks her what it was like caring for her. One of the things, of course, that I thought I'd do as we move through the book is sometimes kind of give you a little bit of a background of what I was thinking as I was writing it. And of course, my first wife, Allison, died of Alzheimer's, and I cared for her for 7 years. And so I took some of that experience out of my own life and sort of plugged it into what has gone on in John's life in between the first book, which, of course, let me get over here, Somewhere Fast. What's happened between the time of the end of Somewhere Fast and the beginning of the Road to Somewhere. And during that period of time, John has actually lost his wife to Alzheimer's. So, again, kind of plugging into my own life and experience, I write a little bit about that, and they have that discussion now as they're driving down the road. Ironically, it was right in the first book. It's right outside of Galena that John, who's on a motorcycle on that trip, sees an unlikely-looking hitchhiker. It's a woman, appears to be probably in her mid-30s or in mid-30s, and dressed, kind of cool, still like, dressed for the road, but not what you would normally see on a hitchhiker. And so he's kind of fascinated, so he pulls over and he meets Nikki, and they engage in a conversation, and eventually he invites her. Does she want to go on Route 66, part of it, riding with him on the motorcycle? It ends up she's a graduate student, and she's actually doing her thesis on old Route 66, and that's why she's been out there hitchhiking. And so there's this period in the book where John and Nikki get to know each other. And when they get to Clinton, Oklahoma, when Nikki really sees what John's trying to do in that book, which is put his life back together a bit after sort of self-destructing, and she feels like that, she probably is in the way of him doing what he needs to do in process. So she leaves him in Clinton, and we don't see her in the rest of the first book, although there's a hint that they stay in contact. So when I started this second book, one of the things that I thought about was, well, what if John got back together with Nikki in this in-between period, and they actually got married? And they do, so that's part of the story. But shortly after them marrying is when Nikki begins to show signs of what they call early onset Alzheimer, and John ends up taking care of her until she dies. And now, it really it shook him, kind of shook him to the core, and when that happened, what we know from this book is that when he tells the whole story to Joy, is that then he went back and finished up his PhD in psychology, which he was studying before he went into the ministry. She still doesn't know his background, that he was a Presbyterian minister. As far as Joy knows, he simply is a college psychology professor, and doesn't really know much about the Bible. And he continues to realize that at some point he needs to really, get honest with her and tell her the whole story, and that will happen as we move along. But the book begins, the second book, The Road to Somewhere, actually begins with him presenting himself simply as this college professor. So he describes to her a little bit about how difficult it was caring for his wife and watching her die. He still hasn't kind of told her the whole story yet, but it was just outside of Galena, where we just went through, that he meets Nikki. So kind of interesting timing. I didn't actually plan it that way, but that's kind of the way that the story developed. So they head down the road, and again, their destination is Riverton, Kansas. Population 600. And really there's only one Route 66 attraction there in Riverton, and that is Eisler Brothers Old Riverton Store. This is a store that was actually built and opened in 1925. Now the significance of that, couple of things. One is that Route 66 didn't actually come into being until 1926. So the store actually, the building of the store, the opening of it precedes the road actually becoming Route 66. Part of what we talked about very early in this whole journey is that Route 66, prior to Route 66, each state was in charge of its own highway system. So there was already a highway here, but it was a Kansas highway. And what Route 66 was that a sort of a National Highway Commission developed to create roads that would run cross-country and all have the same designation. Route 66 was simply a combination of existing roads through each state, that then was declared a United States highway and given the designation of Route 66. So this store was there. 1925, and it's kind of it's really been kept the same. It hasn't really been updated much. It's been through several different owners, and it's just kind of like an old-fashioned general store. It's now on the National Register of Historic Places, but if you go inside the store, it's just got a little bit of everything. It has a lot of Route 66 sort of memorabilia that people can buy. I sort of laughed because I thought it also has a lot of snacks for people to eat along the road, and it's not exactly health food. You can see there all of the different candies that are available, but kind of a cool old store. And again, the main attraction, lots of people on Route 66 stop here simply because it is such a historic place. Joy goes inside and gets permission, as she always does, to be able to shoot the video that they need to shoot outside of the store there, and she gets that permission. So in the book, again, they shoot the little video, and in the video, John does a couple of things. He gives a little bit of a background on Riverton, which was an old mining town, kind of like Galena was also. He also gives a little bit of the history on the Eisler Brothers store. And there's music going on in the background, by the way, all the time inside and apparently kind of going outside where you can hear it also. And that music really provides a great segue into the book of the Bible that's paired up with this stop there in Riverton. And that book of the Bible is the book of Psalms. Again, part of the section of our Bible that is usually referred to as poetry, 5 books. That's why we're making 5 stops on this little stretch through Kansas. John talks a little bit about the 23rd Psalm. And part of what he talks about there is the fact that even though many people, of course, this I don't think is true in the current time in which we live, but I think back at least when I was growing up, it seems like that one of the things that everybody needed to memorize, even in public school, was the 23rd Psalm. And he points out the fact that many people are familiar with the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, is that even if people know that and have memorized it, most of them have never read the rest of the book of Psalms. And the book of Psalms is, so he tells the audience, contains 150 Psalms like the 23rd Psalm. And he tells them that what the Psalms were was that they were actually lyrics to songs that were sung in the temple worship. One of the things I find fascinating about the book of Psalms, by the way, is that if you know a little bit of the background and the history of some of the Psalms, you know that King David wrote about half of them. Many people think he wrote the whole book, but actually he only wrote about 70 of them. It's a collection, much like the Bible itself, which is simply an anthology or a collection of 66 different books. The book of Psalms was a collection of psalms that spanned over 500 years, because you have psalms that were written at the time of David, which would have been about 1000 BC, but you also have psalms that were written all the way after the destruction of Jerusalem and the captivity of the people of Judah. One of those is Psalm 137, and it really talks about Babylon, and it talks about how the Babylonians were demanding of the Israelites to sing them a song of Zion, and it also has a phrase in it which is a reflection of what must have happened when the Babylonians defeated defeated the Israelites and destroyed Jerusalem, that the psalmist writes in 137 that happy is the one who dashes your babies against the rocks. And so it gives us a little bit of a sense of the fact that there are psalms all the way going till the time of the captivity, maybe even after the return. So we're talking about 500 years here. And when you think about how many psalms, how many songs might have been written in that 500-year period, we're talking about thousands. As a matter of fact, one of the references that I was studying said that David himself had written like 4,000 psalms. We're also told back in the book of Kings that Solomon had written 1,050 psalms, and so there was this massive number of psalms, and yet when they put together the book of Psalms, this collection, they narrowed it down to 150. Actually, some of the versions of the Old Testament in the Jewish language actually also had a Psalm 151, which isn't in most of our Bibles. It is in some of the Bibles in the Eastern Orthodox Church. So this is a collection, and again, my sense is they looked for the best of all of the Psalms to put into the collection, and that's why I've always sort of thought of the book as God's greatest hits. So John in the video talks a little bit about this, gives a little bit of that background. He also kind of talks about the different kinds of psalms, because there really are a whole variety in terms of genre, in the same way that when you think about our music, there's this whole variety, of different kinds of songs, and there's the blues, and there's jazz, and there's classic rock, and there's hip hop, and there's all different kinds of songs. And this was true also of the book of Psalms. You don't quite see that, although even in some of the introductions, it tells us what kind of a psalm it was, but we don't know what the Hebrew words mean. But what we do know is just simply by studying the content of the Psalms that there were psalms of worship and praise, which is kind of what the 23rd Psalm is. As a matter of fact, the title of the book in Hebrew is Tehillim, which literally means songs of praise. And that's definitely one category. There are psalms of complaint against God, asking God, why did you let this happen, or why are my enemies triumphing over me? And so they are called psalms of complaint, kind of why God kind of psalms. I think it's good when we read the book to understand that the kind of relationship that the psalmist had with God, and I'd say particularly maybe David, was that he wasn't afraid to challenge God. We live in this fallen world where horrible things happen around us, and a lot of times, what we're feeling is, why did God allow that? Which, of course, we looked at a little bit when we saw the book of Job. There are psalms that are called imprecatory, which express vengeance against Israel's enemies, like Psalm 137, again, the one that talks about Babylonian babies being, smashed against the rocks. A lot of psalms simply about our relationship with God. That might be the biggest main topic of all. And really almost every human emotion expressed in the book. It's historically through the life of the history of Israel and the life of the early church. Psalms has always been one of the favorite books. It's the book that is most quoted in the New Testament. So John is just giving them a little bit of a background. When you go to the video, the longer video on Psalms, what I do is I take each of these different genres and kind of go into a little bit more depth with it. So Again, I'd really encourage you to make sure and watch that longer video that you have a link to in your email or on Facebook. This is what John does kind of at the end of this particular chapter, kind of a short chapter. He simply encourages the viewer of the little video they're making to go to that longer lecture on the book of Psalms, which was kind of the purpose of the short video, to get people to those. And having encouraged them, they wrap up the little video, and John sends Joy into Eisler's store to get him a Coke, and that's kind of the end of this chapter. Next chapter will begin with the actual drive from Riverton to our next stop, which is actually going to be just a bridge that is down the road from Riverton, but it's kind of a special bridge, and it also is right where the road, Route 66, turns south to head toward Oklahoma. So that's where we will kind of stop for the day, and we will pick up there next week here it's actually called Rainbow Bridge, and we will go through the book of the Bible that's paired with this stop at Rainbow Bridge is the book of Proverbs. And we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to be a wise person. So make sure and join us and jump in next week. Thanks for being with us today. And again, remember, take some time and go to the longer video and learn a little bit more about Psalms. And also in that video, I give you some ideas about how to read the book of Psalms and to get through it in a month. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.